Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. People who live in isolated locations. What's your creepiest experience? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Before I bought my current house, which is still fairly isolated, my son and I lived in an old house on 50 acres surrounded by an 850-acre state park. Ultra secluded. Anyway, one night after putting my son to bed, I dozed off in my rocking chair. I was awakened by someone trying to bust through my back door. Heart was racing. I got up, checked to ensure my son was okay, then grabbed my gun out of the safe. Yes, I own one, strictly for protection. I creeped up to my back door, which is in the kitchen. I'm nervous, scared, and full of adrenaline. Still sounds like someone is trying to break down my door. I turn on the porch light and jump in front of the door with a weapon poised for fire. Clinging to my screen door were two enormous raccoons. We just stared at each other. I had been slow roasting pork shoulder in my oven overnight. They smelt it. The best part is I let out an audible, "Dude, you scared the shit out of me." And they slowly got off my door and walked away as if they felt shame for scaring me. I grew up in the middle of the woods in Louisiana. Our closest neighbor was 20 miles away. Our house was on a hill, and at the bottom was a creek that went through the woods for miles and miles. My grandfather would always tell us there were people living in the woods, crazy inbred folk on some the hills have eyes shit. But I always assumed he was just trying to creep us out. So one night, when I was like 8 years old, I sat in the living room watching Pearl Harbor starring Ben Affleck. My father comes into the living room and tells me not to move. He heard footsteps at the back door, slam shut on his way to the bathroom. He thinks someone was in the house, and that he scared them off when he walked down the hallway to the bathroom. So he leaves the house, leaving the front door wide open, which scared the shit out of me. I paused the movie and just listened to silence for a couple of minutes. And of course, the guys are still inside. I'm staring out of the doorway to the living room and see the top of a head peek around the corner. A head with a white sheet over it, cut and tied at the neck. I'm paralyzed, and even if I wanted to run, there'd be nowhere to go but toward this creepy-ass dude. He just stares at me for what feels like forever before he leaves toward the back of the house. The back door slams again. I just sit there and start crying until my father comes back inside. My dad tells me that as he rounded the corner to the back of the house, he caught the guy leaving out the back door. The guy sees my dad and books it down the hill. Then there's a gunshot. According to my father, my grandfather had been sitting on his porch next door and saw the guy walking toward our house. So he grabbed his gun, got back outside in no time to see the guy running down the hill, and shot the dude in the leg. The guy fell, then get back up again before my grandfather could take another shot and disappeared into the woods. By the time the cops showed up, he was gone. They searched but couldn't find the guy. They did find a rundown sort of shack a mile or so into the woods, and it was filled with nothing but pots and pans, so that was weird. Finally, I can contribute, not so much horrifying as it is disturbing. There's a town on the peninsula of Washington state called Westport, about 30 minutes away from the nearest town, which is actually the same town Kurt Cobain grew up in. It's pretty much just a touristy summer spot with a lot of fishing and a small harbor. Last December, my friend had suggested we camp at this state park on this beautiful beach he and his family went to every summer. We were up for an adventure, so all 7 of us decided to pitch in a few dollars to rent a cabin near the beach at Twin Harbor State Park. When we got there, the place is dead. Not, oh, there's a few people, like literally 0 people, 0 cars in town. And the campsite, other than one sheriff patrolling, not even any activity on the road outside of us. When we got to our cabin, the campsite is completely flooded. Washington state winters on the peninsula are literally just 4 months of continuous rain, so we couldn't walk anywhere. All of the benches and chairs were stacked up on each other, and there was one bathroom open. We were essentially stranded in our cabin unless we wanted to drive somewhere, but we made do and decided to go into town. We drive into town and get lunch at some fish and chip shop and visit the lighthouse. And that's when we finally see someone outside of the restaurant. It's one raggedy looking guy who has looking soaking wet walking down the road by himself, and we can smell him from 20 feet away. He's limping really badly and is talking to himself. All of a sudden he yells and just effing face plants full force onto the ground and starts rolling around in the middle of the road like he's being exorcised or something. We call the cops and shortly get out. When we get back, we have dinner and hang out and listen to music together for a while. At around 8 p.m., a shitty beater car screeches down the road where we're staying and parks really sloppily in front of the public restroom. It stays there for about 45 minutes and leaves. Me and my friend Sheffy decide to take a shower before we go to bed that night. As we all walk toward the showers, a woman in her mid-30s, in a cheetah print short skirt and a leather vest, is just sitting on the bench outside of the showers. Keep in mind it's 10 p.m. and raining. Me being the dumbass, I am asking her how the showers work because I've never been here before and assume she's camping somewhere else in the campground. She smirks and looks at me and my friend. Sorry, honey. I only deal in foreign currency. It then hits me that this woman is probably not planning on consuming the same wines me and my friends had for dinner. So we just ignored her and quickly bathed ourselves. When I got out, I saw the woman getting up close to my friend who had just gotten out as well and told her to leave us alone. We start walking back to our cabin, and who else but the junky car from earlier that afternoon, and pulls into his spot again and starts arguing with the woman and tells us to leave them alone. We get back to our cabin with our friends, find and watch the junkie from a distance. He argues with her for a while, and she's getting into his car and drives off. We were relaxed for the rest of the night because we figured it was just some gross junkies trying to get their fix or whatever. Everyone goes to bed except me and Connor. We were casually talking about stuff at 3:30 a.m. and all of a sudden we hear a bunch of cars drive by, 3 massive trucks, and the fucking beater car again. A bunch of redneck-looking guys hop out of their trucks with flashlights. They start approaching the cabins and looking into the windows with the flashlights and fidgeting with the windows. By the time we were realizing what they're doing, they are moving onto their second cabin. We were in the fourth. Me and Connor both start walking toward people and waking them up, telling them the situation is in our hands. Everyone's concerned, and rightfully so. We force them awake and turn all the lights in our cabin on, and the guys outside notice this and immediately leave when they see why 7 people, most of whom have axes. The guys quickly walk back to their trucks and start talking to their friends in the bathroom parking lot, pointing at us and looking at us the entire time. We packed our shit as fast as we could into our cars and drove off. We had driven past them to leave the campground, and they pulled out behind us and followed us from the state park to the highway and promptly turned around. We called the sheriff at the exact horrifying, but we were scared effing shitless. It was like a movie. I don't get scared easily, but I get anxious thinking about what could have happened if we stayed. I lived in a remote Inuit community of only 500. The only way to go is by plane. In June, we had a member of our community who just lost control and started to stab some family members at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Imagine fearing for your life, but not being able to escape since there is no road. The whole drama took away 3+ lives, the life of the killer, and who was finally shot by our police. I was sure I was about to die. There was blood everywhere, and you could hear the victims screaming. And the worst thing is, we had to do this with no other doctors in town and only 4 nurses to help 6 victims. We had to bring the victims to the nursing home on 4-wheelers and random cars, since we have no official ambulance. The whole thing was a nightmare. I don't live there, but I go camping often up on some land my grandpa owns. There aren't any houses. It's 7 miles down a dirt road. There's still nothing for miles. All sorts of animals and produce. We usually hear coyotes, something, and occasionally deer, and once a moose. There's also occasionally a cow or two. I'm not sure where they came from. Anyway, one night the coyotes wake me up. The rest of my family is asleep still, and I swear I heard a man screaming for help repeatedly. It went on for a few minutes, and then heard the sound suddenly disappeared. It creeped me out, and I had trouble sleeping the rest of the night. There's a part of me that for sure romanticizes the idea of living way away from people, but then you think about modern convenience, and I'm sure I'm adaptable, but sometimes a little convenience is good. When I lived way out in the middle of nowhere, Australia, nothing but desert outside, nearest neighbors about 10k away. Our place was at the end of the long dirt road with only our house and no others. So no one can come down there unless they were there specifically to visit us. Was taking a bath one night, look up and see a man's face staring at me through the window. Freaked the F out. I go out of the bathrobe, on etc., and told SO, who said I probably imagined it, especially since that window was so high up and no one could reach it from the outside house of stumps. I made him go look out there, and yeah, someone had gone into our shed, which was a good 500 meters away from the house, got some wooden pallets, stacked them up, and peeled through my window. If it were a random peeper in an easier accessible location, like a suburb, it probably would have been weirding me out a little bit, but then got over it. But the amount of work this guy had to go make me remember him to this day, and wonder how he'll broadcast or get out there with no car. Did he just live on our property or nearby in the bush somewhere? My grandparents' house is right outside of town. A neighborhood is one on one side, but on all the other sides, everyone has an acre or two that they're sitting on, including my grandparents. So isolated-ish. A friend and I were smoking cigarettes in the large enclosed porch one night when we were home, and in complete silence, we heard a really loud pig squeal, like right next to us. It sounded like it was in the enclosed area with us. It was so cold. Sure, people have horses and chickens around. I don't think any neighbors own pigs, though. It also didn't quite sound like a pig, more like a man making a pig noise. I can't remember or emphasize this enough. It was one of the most weirdest sounds I've ever heard. The scariest thing was how displaced the sound was. I mean, even if their next door neighbor had a pig, it would have been far enough anyway to appear a lot quieter. We bolted inside and locked the door immediately. Lots of other weird things from that house too, like switches flipping, the physical switch, not a shortage thing, when I was alone, etc. Places still give me the creeps at night. I live in a tiny village in rural Alaska. There's only 60 residents, no medical care, and the only way in or out is by flying on a small chartered plane. Last winter, We had some really rough weather. It was in the minus 20s and 30s for a pretty long stretch, which isn't too crazy, but the VIPSO showed up and told me he needed me to keep the kids at school. He also told me he needed my husband's ASAP and that I needed to stay by the school VHS video. Turns out, a small airplane had gone down outside of our village due to ice fog. They needed all available people, which is why they needed my husband to head out on four-wheelers to try to locate them. For some reason, they weren't getting any signal from the downward plane, but the injured passengers were able to use the radio. I had to stay by the school ratio, which was, for some reason, the only radio in town getting the signal and talk to passengers. It was freezing, and nightfall comes extremely early in Alaska, not winter. The passengers were rescued by the U.S. Coast Guard a couple of hours after they crashed, thankfully. The passengers were able to finally connect with them via radio. It was a tense and horrible couple of hours. We'd recently lost members to a neighborhood village to a horrific plane crash, and everyone was already on edge. So this incident caused a lot of people to refuse after the crash, and even though I grew up with my tiny money and those tiny airplanes, the first ride after that crash was rough. A couple months later, I was sitting outside enjoying the sunshine when I heard a helicopter. The helicopter flew right over our village while carrying pieces of what was left of the airplane. It gives me the chills to think about seeing the ruined people plane being lifted over the edge.